Cops and other law enforcement people of Reddit, what were some cases you worked on that made you think, even if for a moment, that something supernatural or paranormal was going on? Episode 4. Not my story but my husband's. He is a correctional officer and was working the night shift. He told me that around 2, almost 3 in the morning, he had to do rounds and do the counting. As he passed a cell, he heard an inmate bang on the cell door and scream help. He ran back to the cell, told the tower officer to open the door. As he shines his light in the cell, the inmate wakes up, asking if everything is okay. It left him confused for the longest time. My husband no longer works the night shift. A former inmate in a small county jail in Oregon. At about 2 a.m. one night, the radio in the pod started squealing really loud, all static screeching. One of the COs came in and turned it down, changed the station, walked back out. The next day when I was working in the kitchen, one of the nicer COs came in and was talking to us about what had happened the night before. Apparently, on the video of the pod, you can see something of a shadow come out of one of the cells and move to the radio. About a minute later, there was a flash in front of the radio before it got loud. Unfortunately, I ended up back in jail and got placed in the cell the CO said the shadow had come out from. Something about that cell creeped me out. It almost sucked the thoughts right from you. Obligatory, not my story but my uncle's. Years ago, my uncle told us about a woman who would call the police station just about every night claiming that fairies or elves were breaking into her house and stealing her food. As is custom, every time she calls, they send a unit to check on her. My uncle gets it about 2 to 3 times per week. Every night they stop by her house and reassure her that no one has broken in and calmed her down. One night when he gets to the house, she has poured powdered sugar all over the floor to record their tracks, and my uncle says he literally has to do a double take. All over the floor of her kitchen are these little tracks, tiny like nothing he's seen before. His partner starts taking photos and trying to figure it out. A few other officers come in, as most of them had gotten the call to her house too and wanted to see it. 10 police officers are all completely baffled as to what these weird little prints are. Turns out a possum had babies and they were sneaking into her kitchen for warmth or food. The prints looked so foreign because most of the time, baby possums are carried by their mother, not running around. 7 are rounded up and released in a less residential area. I was working as a paramedic, and my station had a mental hospital in our area. They knew they weren't allowed to call us for basic transports, that it had to be an emergency. We got a call there one night for a possible stroke on the 4th floor. We knew that the 4th floor was where they kept people guilty of murder and that a police officer would be with us. When we get there, the nurse has this look on her face that we are really about to walk into something sketchy. She tells us that the lady won't stop looking to the left, her excuse for calling us and saying it was a stroke, and talking to something. When we walk into the room, she's in full conversation with something outside the window. We asked her to talk to us, and she got quiet. We load her up, and the Leo cuffs her to the gurney. When we get outside, she looks back towards the window, then quickly shoots her head to the other side and said it's so cool how fast they fly. About 5 minutes from the hospital, she asks me if I'm worried that the ambulance is about to break down so that she and her flying yellow friends could kill us. I said no, and she started this screeching laugh that I'll never forget. The Leo was as white as snow and said nothing to her. We dropped her off in the ER, came back outside, and the ambulance had cut off and wouldn't start. I went back inside to ask Leo if he had turned it off, and they said no. Leo walked inside with us. We couldn't find him, and the dispatch sent a bunch of cars to look, but he wasn't at the hospital. They found him sitting in his cruiser back at a mental hospital, and he couldn't remember how he got there. To this day, I really think she and the officer saw something. I was a cop for about 5 years, and worked for a boss that used to tell this story all the time. Just a warning, this story contains self-harm, so don't read if that will trigger you. When he was a rookie and got his first car, they mostly walked back then. He patrolled his district and decided to check out this cemetery area. Kids often went back there, as it was near a skate park, to do extracurricular activities. As he drove up, he saw a person who had hung himself from a tree. He immediately called it in, and the scene was properly investigated. Well, the weird part is, the next night, he became curious, so he went back to the same area. The tree was gone. The city had not put in any work orders to cut the tree. The city I worked for did not do that type of thing, as it cost money, and the city was too cheap. There was also no stump in the ground. There was no place the tree could have gone. He was in that spot for about 6 or so hours during the investigation. So, he was familiar with it. It spooked him at the time. Not a cop, but I used to work private security. For a bit, I worked at a shopping mall. My partner and I already had a feeling this place was haunted, one reason being the homicide that happened right before I was hired. The very west of the mall made the hair on my neck stand up the most, and I don't know why. It's also good to note that there is an animal shelter at this end of the mall. You can see the cats and dogs through the windows at night. They would bark and whine a lot. One night, I was walking to that end of the mall, and I started feeling like someone was following me or walking behind me. When I got to the shelter, none of the animals were making noise, but I swear to God, all of the ones that were awake were staring at or behind me. I got really bad goosebumps and a horrible feeling in my gut. Finally, I put my head down and walked as fast as possible out of the closest door. Once I was outside, all of the negative feelings went away. My brother is a cop, and there was a weird house in the city he patrols. It was a super old house and had a dirt basement where human skulls and bones were found, and after that, all sorts of crazy things just happened. Every family who moved into the house immediately tried selling it back or just fled and wouldn't go back. The city had enough, so they just bulldozed the house and planted a garden or something. I forget the name, but the house had a name like the Jenkins house or something, but anyways there's a plaque now at the garden that just says, "This is where the Jenkins house used to sit." It's probably too late for this to the surface, but this is my dad's story. He went to a call where a father had gone crazy and decided to shoot his family. He killed his wife and was looking around, trying to find his 5-year-old son to shoot him. The boy had run outside and was trying to hide on the side of the house behind the trash cans. The father eventually found him, and point-blank emptied nearly a full magazine at the boy. When my dad arrived, they found the boy in shock, hiding right where his dad found him, not a wound on his body. There were bullet holes in the side of the house all around the boy. When they finally got to question him about it, they asked him what happened when his dad found him on the side of the yard. The boy replied, "The angel was in front of me with a shield, and he saved me. He pushed the gun away from me." I was driving along and found a girl just standing in the middle of the road. My initial thoughts were to tell her to pay attention, but it was clear that while the lights were on, nobody was home. During my whole time with her, she never uttered a word. I was left in a weird situation. She had done nothing, clearly needed help, but medically nothing seemed wrong. As I am pondering what on earth I should do, the girl suddenly starts spinning. Now spinning is not illegal, and I'm starting to think this girl is one of those protesters that wind up police. I've dealt with Troll Station before, so I think to crack on, spin to your heart's content. Then she loses her balance and falls, whacking her head on the side of the police car. Great. So, I call an ambulance, but she seems fine. Still not talking, but she is looking up at the sky. It's a nice day, so fine, enjoy the sun. I do some writing and look back at her now bright red face and watering eyes and realize she is trying to damage her retinas by forcing herself to look directly at the sun. That's a new one on me, so now I'm holding a book or something above her to shield her eyes. Ambulance arrives, and we get to the hospital, and now she has forgotten how to walk. Now I'm 99% sure she is a wind-up merchant, but I get her a wheelchair. In the wheelchair, she strikes up an I'm a little teapot pose and keeps this up for the next hour, 0 movements, just frozen with her arms out. So, I now have 3 potential situations. She is pretending to be frozen in time. She is suffering from a mental health issue. She has been possessed. By now, I'm convinced it's the latter, but I section her and leave her with professionals. A week later, I called the hospital, and they told me she was still frozen. I'm not a cop, nor law enforcement, but I was traveling with some mates in the Greek islands. We'd always felt 100% safe. You could leave your life savings, which wasn't much as a backpacker, on a banana lounge, and it wouldn't get touched for days. Anyway, there was a wet t-shirt comp on, and we were up the front discerning the quality of the competition, and all of a sudden, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, almost like I felt sick. I was dead certain something bad was going to happen. Anyway, I moved to the back and started watching our stuff. It took maybe 10 minutes, and someone came past and swiped my mate's bag with everything he had in it. I chased them down and got it back. To this day, the only way to describe the feeling was supernatural. I'm a believer of something else, but that was a pretty weird experience. When I was 19 to 21, I was employed as a security enforcement officer through a local private investigator firm. I know I wasn't technically the lay you're asking for, but I've always wanted some place to share this story. I spent a 12 p.m. to 12 a.m. shift at an upscale theater, and then my boss called me and told me I was assigned to a YMCA construction site that everyone kept calling out from. The sooner I could come in, the better, he said. So, after working 12 hours at the theater, I spent another 3 p.m. to 8 a.m. at that site. By the time I arrived home, it was around 9:30, and I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. But I received a phone call. It was my brother. His birthday was that day, and I had completely forgotten about it. My whole family and I went shopping around and then ate at a restaurant about 45 minutes from my house. At around 1 p.m., I told them I had to leave because I just couldn't keep my eyes open. As I was driving home, no amount of music or driving with the windows down would keep my eyes open. I started drifting into the opposite lane of traffic. I decided it was best if I pulled over. I looked around, and there was an ice cream shop. So, I stopped in. It was a weird place for it to be, because the highway I was driving on was a smaller country highway, and it was on the outskirts of town. So, an odd place to put a shop that would seem to rely on foot traffic. There was a woman out front asking if I had stopped for ice cream. I didn't want to just tell her I wanted a nap, so I said yes. I went inside, and it was rather junky. It looked like they bought furniture from old barbecue restaurants and threw it at random into the building. The same woman was now behind the counter. I said I wanted 2 scoops of chocolate on a cone and pulled out my bank's debit card. "We don't take cards here," she said. She handed me the ice cream cone. I dug around in my pockets and went back to my truck for change. I never keep anything but a debit card on me, but I found about 50 cents, and I gave it to her. She said the price was $1.80, but that'll do. I didn't know what else to do, because I was half asleep, and she had given me the ice cream cone already, despite the fact I was attempting to pay with a debit card as she was making it. I said thanks and walked outside and ate it. I'm a pig when I eat, so by the time I made it to my truck, I had some already on my face and uniform. Before I could make it to my truck, the woman walked outside to talk to me. "You look troubled," she said. "But whatever you're going through, you'll be fine." I get in my truck and leave this, I'm now assuming, crazy ice cream vendor. I get home and fall asleep. The next day I'm getting my uniform ready when I see chocolate ice cream on my uniform shirt. The ice cream shop wasn't far away from my house, so I felt I should go pay her what I owed. I pulled up to the building, but it was locked. Their building was empty, and there was a sheet of dust caked over the doors like no one had touched them in years. Not cop, but military. My unit had some training exercises in some jungle somewhere. We were going down a river in these little motorboats when someone realized we were 1 man and 1 boat short. So we go looking for the guy. Eventually, find his boat down some side fork of the river. No sign of the guy whatsoever. There wasn't anything that indicated that he might have gotten attacked by a croc either. He just went poof. Never found his body. No scraps of uniform, no blood, nothing. For all we know, he got nabbed by some native tribe and suffered death by snoo-snoo. Leo here. Okay, so I was supervising on the evening shift in a small town in rural Australia. We have a large river that snakes its way past the town and runs close to some of the residential areas. It's 1 kilometer wide in some parts, has steep banks and thick bush in the bed when it's dry. One of my crews was tied up with something, and the other was attending 2 brothers threatening suicide after having a fight at a residence near the bank of the river. I heard the job and attended to give my crew a hand. Upon arrival, we found one brother who was self-harming and on drugs. We restrained him to prevent him from harming himself. He was telling us he wanted to kill himself and was taken to hospital via ambulance for mental health. As we had made the apprehension, my crew had to accompany the ambulance for everyone's safety. My crew leaves, and then I'm told by the family that the other brother had run off down the river dry bank, threatening to hang himself. The family said he was drunk but didn't have anything to actually hang himself with. I was concerned and attended the riverbank near where they thought he went down the steep riverbank. Both crews were busy, and I was by myself at night and it started drizzling. I parked my unit at the top of the bank with the lights pointed onto the bush, hoping that if he saw my lights, he'd come towards me. I got out my torch and made my way down the bank. I found a small clearing, and a small distance away was a thick bush. I heard something moving in the bush. It sounded like something taking deliberate steps in the bush. I yelled out, thinking it was the guy I was after. I told him I was here to help and pleaded with him to come out. No response, and when I was talking, whatever it was stopped moving. I kept talking, attempting to make contact as my instincts told me someone was in the thick bush in front of me. No response. My torch couldn't penetrate the bush, but I could hear distinct footfalls. I stopped making any noise, turned off my light, and stood still listening. I hear movement coming towards me in the bush. I remained still and listened. It came closer. Without thinking, my hand went down to my gun, and I was ready to draw. I turned on my light and walked forward, and heard whatever it was moving away from me. I backed off, turned off my light, and remained silent. It started coming closer to me, probing my position. I repeated the exercise once more, and once more, it backed off and came back at a different angle. By this stage, I was on high alert. Something told me to get out. I got this heavy, eerie feeling. Any animal that was down there would have run off upon my approach. No animal I know approaches or probes a human's position at night like that. Once I got the overwhelming feeling to leave, I backed off, with my hand on my gun, and I didn't turn my back until I had to climb up the bank. Once at the top and back with my car, I felt a lot better, but I could still hear something moving in the bush. I stayed there for a while as I was curious. I left and conducted inquiries, finding the missing brother on the other side of town fast asleep and fine. To this day, I don't know what I ran into down in the riverbed that night.